Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers. Now, in this video, I'm going to be talking about a pretty old running watch. I imagine a watch that a lot of people are still using, but it was, to put this into context, back in June, it was a pretty quiet, kind of period in terms of launches for running watches, sports watches, smart watches. So I didn't actually have a lot new to test. Now, I did think, well, I could throw on something that I have had more recently and do some longer term testing. Though I thought about maybe throwing on an older watch, a watch that actually, was one of the first watches that I tested and tested out for running. And that watch is the Garmin Forerunner 235. Now, there was another reason why I decided to pick this watch, despite it being one of the first watches that I've used. Now, last year in Strava's kind of trend in year report, the Garmin 235 was was named as one of the top 3 upload devices, which for me feels amazing, considering that watch is near 10 years old now, and there's been different, newer generations of the 200 series, the Forerunner series. So what I wanted to do is I managed to track down a Forerunner 235 thanks to Garmin. I think one of their product team managed to find one for me. So what I decided to do in that month was throw on the 235. Throughout that month, I used the 235 for all of my runs. I raced with it as well too. Generally wore it outside of running, use it as a smartwatch as well. And really get a sense of whether, in this day and age when so much has happened, particularly on the Garmin front, but in general in terms of sports watches and running watches, whether I would get on with the 235 and I wouldn't miss a newer watch like the 265 or the 965, which are generally the watches I would tend to use, and also the Apple Watch Ultra 2. So yeah, in this video, what I'm basically going to do is take you through my experiences of what I really liked about my time with the 235, what I didn't really miss from a kind of modern running watch, and actually the flip side of what I did actually miss, and whether I think, ultimately I could live with a watch like a Garmin Forerunner 235, or whether I was desperate to get back to a more modern, smarter running watch. So yeah. This is basically a month living with a Garmin Forerunner 235, a watch that Strava kind of named as one of its top upload devices in its kind of yearly report last year, and ultimately see if it still holds up against other running watches that are out there today. So I'm going to start with the things that I would say I missed from my time using the Garmin Forerunner 235. And I think one thing I wasn't expecting to say about my experience was that I really actually missed the kind of morning reports that Garmin has introduced to its newest watches. Now, the Garmin Forerunner 235 is too old to support these kind of new morning reports, and the morning reports is essentially pulling together, collating some information that you can look over when you first wake up, and it'll give you a sense of, what's coming up in your day. Also look at things like the weather, but also look at, metrics like your training readiness, whether you're in good shape, you've had good sleep. Now, it doesn't seem like a big thing to not have on that watch, but ultimately I feel like, I initially thought it was a bit of a gimmicky thing when Garmin introduced it. I have found it more useful to look at my day or have something to kind of give me a glance over at my kind of metrics from the kind of evening sleep, my training readiness, but also those weather reports and also anything that's coming up. And I felt like when I woke up in the morning and I looked at the 235, I kind of was so used to kind of seeing that information, and whether that information is always useful or not, I did quite like the idea of being able to have that put in front of me every morning. So that was definitely one thing I didn't think I was going to miss from my time using the Garmin Forerunner 235, but I think it's actually a feature that I've grown to really like on the newer Forerunner watches, which I think, it's a bit more of a kind of smartwatch-esque feature, but I think ultimately in terms of being useful and, as I said, pulling in that collection of data, whether it's about your day or whether it's about your training and about your sleep, I do think it's actually quite a nice feature to have. Now, the next one's a pretty big one, and it is around heart rate monitoring and GPS accuracy. Now, we have to keep in mind that this is a device that is near 10 years old. So obviously older technology, a lot has happened in this space, particularly on, the Garmin front in terms of its sensor technology. But we should add that the 235 was the first watch in Garmin's range to include its Elevate optical sensor technology to improve or offer improved heart rate monitoring performance. It is also a watch that does allow you to pair external heart rate monitor sensors as well too. So That is a massive plus, and generally when we talk about the monitoring performance or heart rate monitor performance on watches today, we do still advise on using external heart rate monitor, and you are able to do that here on the Garmin Forerunner 235. Now, in terms of that performance, pretty much as expected, it wasn't fantastic, and when you look at it up against newer Garmin Forerunner watches, I think of things like the Forerunner 265, which is the latest version of the 200 series, there really is a step up in terms of performance, particularly from that kind of wrist-based heart rate monitoring. And, it really was, a big step for Garmin to have that new sensor in there, but ultimately it's a very old generation of that Elevate sensor, which still isn't spotless in its kind of latest generation, but it definitely is much better than it was 10 years ago when I first tested the Forerunner 235, and even in my test over that month. Now, the other one is GPS performance and accuracy. Now, you're not getting the latest kind of multi-band GPS mode, which we've kind of talked about being, a real kind of push in terms of the innovation of GPS performance, particularly in those areas where it can be challenging, whether it's near tall buildings, whether it's kind of densely forested areas. Garmin's multi-band mode has really pushed things in terms of that performance, and it's probably one of the best, examples of that multi-band dual band mode we're seeing in watches. Now, you obviously don't have that on the 235, and unsurprisingly, I think, for a lot of runs, it was generally okay. When I got to that extreme stress testing, you could definitely see the differences. Now, I used it for a race. I had the 965 and the 235 on a looped race, a looped course, and ultimately you could see the differences in the tracks ultimately. So the last thing I want to talk about is around kind of interacting with the Forerunner 235 and how it compares to interacting with a newer Forerunner watch. And I think that's really around kind of not having a touchscreen display here. Now, I think I missed the touchscreen display more so than the color displays that we're seeing on newer Garmin's. And I think it's really about, I'm all for physical buttons on running watches, and I think I would happily take more physical buttons over a growing kind of, emphasis on using the touchscreen display. But I think having a combination of the two does work really nicely. I think particularly it can be during runs, but also outside of running as well. Now, I think biggest examples I can kind of talk about here in terms of missing that touchscreen display is kind of when notifications would pop up. If there were screens I wanted to kind of quickly swipe through, my natural reaction was to swipe on the screen, forgetting that it didn't support that kind of touchscreen functionality. And I do think it shows that moving towards kind of a little bit more like smartwatches and having that touchscreen functionality does actually improve and enhance the experience. I think the software in general on the 235, definitely looks very different to what we are used to now on newer Forerunners, but ultimately it's pretty easy to get to grips with. But you could see where it could benefit from having that touchscreen support, which obviously wasn't, prominent on Garmin's watches just yet. Ultimately having that support now on newer Forerunner watches, I think, is a big plus, and I'm now seeing that more, having gone back to a watch which doesn't have it and really could benefit from having it. Now, another thing I missed from using a more modern and newer Forerunner watch was when it came to kind of tracking non-running focused activities. Now, so the Forerunner 235 is a very much running focused watch, but it also does track cycling as well too. But then outside of that, it's pretty limited in terms of the number of profiles. And it really, for me, it reminded me that we maybe take for granted that you do have that kind of extensive kind of range of profiles that are supported on newer Forerunner watches. So yeah, while it's not a kind of running specific one, I think, for a lot of people who aren't just using their Forerunner to track their runs, I think that kind of more basic kind of support in terms of the sports profiles that are on the 235, that was definitely something that I noticed in my time. As I said, it wasn't a massive issue, but it is something that I definitely noticed it in my experience of, how I use my newer Forerunner watch compared to the older 235. Okay, so into the things that I didn't actually miss during my time using the Garmin Forerunner 235. And I'll start with, not having all of the smartwatch features. It can kind of display notifications, can control your kind of music playing on your phone. You can see weather forecasts. I think what my time kind of really kind of taught me was that actually those are the types of features generally that I think I make most use of in or on newer Forerunner watches. Those very kind of I would say probably look like basic features at that time were very good features to have on a running watch, and generally those were the features that I felt that I used, and I didn't feel like I missed those other kind of richer smartwatch features that you do get on newer Forerunners. I like the idea of being able to see my notifications, and the support on the 235 is pretty good. You're not going to be able to respond to them, you're not going to be able to act on them, but in terms of looking at them, taking them in, absolutely fine. I like the fact the music controls are there as well, and I generally will run with my phone, so that's not a big issue, and I kind of find that useful to have. And I think for me, yeah, the basic smartwatch features on the 235 worked well enough for me, and I didn't feel like I missed the bigger ones that you do get on the newer Forerunners. So the next thing I didn't miss, and I would say I didn't think I'd be talking about, is battery life. Now, with the Garmin Forerunner 235, you are getting, in terms of promised battery life, you're getting less than when you compare it to, the newer Garmin Forerunner 265 by a good few days, and kind of that general smartwatch mode. You're getting less in terms of GPS battery life as well too. For me, battery life, which is something I thought was going to be an issue, wasn't really when, you put it into context with other watches and actually the newer kind of Forerunner watches and how I would expect to use those watches and for those watches to perform. One thing I would say is obviously you are dealing with an older kind of charging cable. It's kind of this closed peg style, which I don't absolutely love. And, ultimately Garmin have moved away from that kind of setup. So that's a minor thing. I think, not ideal in terms of charge setup. And, I did miss the kind of simpler one that you get on newer Garmin's. But in terms of that overall battery life performance, I didn't feel like I was getting massively let down in my time. And I think also what I like about it is that, if you are running low, it will let you know it's running low. It will capture that run if you've kind of got caught out kind of mid-run, and you still got that data there from the watch. And I think there's newer watches from other brands that aren't capable of doing that. So Garmin was doing that very early days, and there are watches that will literally not capture any or not store any of your data if it kind of runs out of battery mid-run. So yeah, battery life, it was, if I thought about how I wanted it to kind of, perform, I was pretty happy. I didn't feel like I was getting massively shortchanged with the 235, which is something I wasn't expecting to see in my time with it. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about here that I didn't really miss in my time with the 235, and I really kind of alluded to it already in this video, is that I didn't massively miss having a colour display. Now, the colour displays, I think, are welcome additions to Garmin's watches, and ultimately, getting those colour displays on those watches out, having a massive impact on battery life was really important for Garmin, and they have managed to do that across its watches that now include it. But I think ultimately what my time with the 235 taught me and reminded me, I think more so than anything, is that transfected displays are still very good. They're still very good reasons to have them on running watches. And I think in terms of the way I use that watch, in terms of the features that are available to me, and the kind of visibility that I've got across different conditions, mainly outdoors, where that's really where it really matters for me. It was all very good. I think in terms of like looking at my running metrics in real time, in terms of looking at the kind of smartwatch features that you have there and the display that you've got there, it was absolutely fine. I didn't feel like I was getting an inferior experience having a watch that didn't have a color display on it. So after a month of living with the Garmin Forerunner 235, was I desperate to get that off my wrist and get a newer running watch on it? I would say my time has been interesting, and actually it wasn't as, I wasn't that desperate to throw a newer running watch on. When I did, there was absolutely some features that I missed and I'm glad to have back. But I think in terms of my experience with 235, I think, it wasn't I didn't feel like I was getting a poorer design despite it not having that touchscreen or color display. The screen is pretty good on it. Would like a little less bezel there, but ultimately I think, using it day to day was absolutely fine. I didn't feel like I was missing out massively from a battery point of view as well, which I think was really important for me. And actually having a little bit of a stripped back experience, and actually a lot of the data being generally pretty good, meant it was still a very solid performing running watch. I think where things changed for me, or not necessarily changed, but I think, I can see the benefits of having a newer watch, is really on the the innovations that have happened, particularly on the tracking point of view, having those, newer Garmin's having kind of that dual band, multi-band GPS mode, improvements in the kind of optical, wrist-based heart rate monitoring, the additional kind of training analysis. I think generally I could absolutely get on with that watch. And I think for a lot of instances, a lot of runs, it was absolutely fine. I think it's when you know what you can get, but I think particularly on an accuracy point of view, I think particularly on a kind of training analysis point of view and what you can get at that 200, the Forerunner 200 series range, you can kind of see, well, actually, I would benefit or would like to have that, additional or those additional features. So yeah, actually, it wasn't a horrible experience to watch, but actually going for an older watch just shows you that, a lot can still hold up today in a space where watches are getting smarter, offering more features, but actually having quite a stripped back experience was quite nice in a lot of ways. And yeah, my experience with 235 wasn't terrible. And I think a lot of things I liked about it. As I said, was I desperate to get a newer watch on? Not necessarily, but when I did appreciate the things that I talked about that I did kind of miss in my time. But, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And I think, living with the 235 for a month wasn't as bad as expected. Okay, so there you have it, a slightly different running watch video for you. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you enjoyed the insights. If there are any other videos around running watches that you'd like to see from us, do let us know. As always, like and subscribe. Hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos. And yeah, we'll see you for the next Run Testers video.